My name is Corey Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Action Coalition. It is great to see so many pro-housing people and people who say yes to housing out here today. And all of us share a fundamental belief that everybody deserves a safe, quality, affordable place to live. And we know that the process of building housing in San Francisco is outdated, time-consuming, and flat-out broken, which is why we are so excited that Mayor London Breed, Supervisor Joel Engardio, and Supervisor Matt Dorsey have introduced a pivotal piece of legislation to start addressing that problem. San Francisco needs to build more housing, a minimum of 82,069 units over the next 8 years to be exact. And if we were going to make good on this promise, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors needs to pass pro-housing legislation. And today, a piece of that solution, the constraints removal legislation, is going to be heard by the Planning Commission. And with any luck, it'll be in front of the Board of Supervisors soon. I want to have our first speaker come and kick us off tonight, a champion for housing here in San Francisco Mayor London Breed.
Corey, you must have been up late last night because it's the daytime right now. You see, he has on shades. Who knows what he was doing? The residual effects of pride in San Francisco, right? We like to have a good time when we can. Well, thank you all so much for being here. We're here with a number of housing advocates and various groups who continue to push for housing reforms in the city and county of San Francisco. Some of you remember a few years back when State Senator Scott Wiener introduced SB 827. And when I was running for mayor at the time, so many people said, you can't support this. People on the West Side are going to be opposed to it. And I was one of the only persons running for mayor to support it. And when I went to the West Side, and in fact, there were a lot of people that were not happy with the fact that I was supportive of this, but I asked the audience at the Irish Cultural Center, how many of you were born and raised in San Francisco and grew up in this city, been here for about 40, 50 years? All the hands went up like, yes, I'm a proud San Franciscan, like this lady down here in the green shirt. Then I asked, how many of you raised your kids in San Francisco? And it was like, yes, I raised my kids. They went to Galileo High School. My kids grew up in San Francisco. Then I said to the audience, how many of your kids still live in San Francisco? And then the room got quiet. Hardly anybody raised their hand. The fact is, so many people have had the ability to live in this city for many generations and is oftentimes the only reason why they can still afford to live here. But we have failed. We have failed to be as aggressive as we know we need to be to build more housing in San Francisco to ensure that not only could people who are struggling to afford to live here can stay here, but what happens to the next generation? What happens to the folks who are working hard, 2 and 3 jobs, and still can't afford the rent or can't afford to put a down payment on a home to stay in the place that they were born and raised in? We have to get out of our own way. The layers of bureaucracy that have been created, and oftentimes things that we don't even have a say in, have really been a problem for the burden of building housing. There is a property on Mission Street as we speak that houses over 100 families. And you know how long it took between the time the property was identified and the first family moved in? All affordable units. It took 10 years. 10 years, and it wasn't just about the financing. It was about the process and what we have to go through to even put shovels in the ground to get housing built. And everyone has said time and time again, we support affordable housing. Well, right now there's only clearly 2 supervisors here that I can honestly say, Matt Dorsey and Joel Engardio, who have not only talked about supporting building more housing in San Francisco, but their decisions and votes have reflected building more housing in San Francisco. And as a board of supervisors deliberated 10 housing units that they basically said no to for complicated, kind of unsubstantiated reasons, here we are again. We say we support it, but our actions show something completely different. We have to get out of our own way. And we need people in San Francisco to rise up and to demand change. The fact that we had to introduce policies now, very bold policies, that, for example, the state density bonus, San Francisco has no say whatsoever in whether or not anyone who builds housing in this city can use the state density bonus. They can use it whether we say so or not, yet we have a hearing process to deliberate the state density housing bonus with no say whatsoever. It is a waste of time and waste of resources. When we talk about converting even office buildings downtown, we know that some of the requirements are different when you're talking about building new housing. So some of the outdoor requirements don't make sense for that. And the fact that we have to go through a conditional use to debate that is not necessary. When we have housing laws that exist, that are already a part of various neighborhoods, when we have height limits and recess back from the side, all these things are in place. Why are we still deliberating on whether or not these units can be built in the first place? We have created laws for the sake of having laws. We have created policies for the sake of having policies and looking like we're doing something. And right now, we need to make changes so that we actually are doing something, and that is speeding up housing production in San Francisco. The city has over 50,000 units that have already been approved. Park Merced on the west side of town was approved before I was even on the board of supervisors and hasn't even started. We got over 30,000 units in the pipeline. We have the ability to do this, but we have to create bold policies to get out of the way to make it happen. The state is requiring the city to build 82,000 units in the next 8 years. We can't even build 5,000 units a year. And we can't do that not just because of the money, but because of our policies. Today at the planning department, we want to see change. And when this legislation goes to the Board of Supervisors, we want to see change. I am tired of making promises that we're going to get housing built in this city only to have obstructionists get in the way and stop these projects because they don't want to block their view or because they don't want to see affordable housing with low-income residents in their neighborhood. Enough is enough. Let's get it done, and let's get it done today. I got more to say, but there's a couple of other speakers. And I want to really thank HAC. I want to thank YIMBY. I want to thank so many of the advocates who are pushing for more housing in this city. It means so much, and it's going to make a difference when we start having people get their keys to their new homes because of what we're fighting for. And at this time, I would want to introduce a member of YIMBY. Yes, in my backyard. Yes, build the housing. Yes, make it taller. Yes, make it happen. Yes, make it rain homes in San Francisco. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jane Natoli.
I don't know how you follow that. Thank you to Mayor Breed. As she mentioned, my name is Jane Natoli. I'm the San Francisco Organizing Director for YIMBY Action. As YIMBYs, we're proud to be out here today supporting Mayor Breed, Supervisor Engardio, and Supervisor Dorsey's legislation to speed up the production of housing. We want to make it more consistent throughout the city while also allowing for more varied types of homes, and we want to incentivize affordable housing. This legislation does all of that. A core tenet of YIMBY organizing is to make it easier and more predictable to build homes. By eliminating unnecessary hearings and notifications and creating more uniform rules, this legislation does just that. Even when projects comply with our own rules and standards, as we have seen this week, we go through a burdensome process. It's a lot of notifications, it takes planning a long time. We take away the ability for the department to focus on what's in their name, planning. As a friend of mine likes to say, it's not the Department of Reacting, it's the Department of Planning. That's what they should be doing. For too long, we've allowed people to abuse our system, arguing over minor aspects of their neighbor's home renovation through long and drawn-out processes. We're empowering nosy neighbors and high-powered lawyers more than we empower people who are trying to add a bedroom for their growing family or add an ADU for their multi-generational household. For too long, we've had esoteric rules about the frontage of a property or where the laundry room can go, or even whether senior housing can be built in all of our neighborhoods in San Francisco. It's hard for me as someone who does this every day to follow it. It's hard for planning to follow it every day, and it's inconsistent throughout the city. We need to make that easier for people to understand. For too long, we've had a local density bonus that is not competitive with the states. No one uses it. And we continue to saddle our subsidized affordable housing, the kind of housing we hear people say we need the most, with arcane rules that make it harder to build. Another piece that this will address. Thanks to the efforts of Mayor Breed, Supervisor Engardio, and Supervisor Dorsey, we finally have a piece of legislation to tackle that. But this is just one piece of the housing element that we agreed to unanimously. The Board of Supervisors unanimously passed our housing elements. But that means we need to pass this legislation that's going before planning today. That means the board should also unanimously pass that. As advocates and activists, it's important for us to set the tone. That's why we're here today. We're here to create energy and to hold our city accountable if it doesn't take the actions that it needs to. The status quo has increased costs and uncertainty for housing due to our Byzantine rules. That's why we've fought for years to get to the point that we're at right now of having more predictable and less burdensome process. That's why we're going to keep showing up to get the implementation of our housing element across the finish line, and that's how we're going to get to 82,000 homes in the next 8 years. Thank you to everybody for showing up today. It's my honor to now introduce District 4 Supervisor Joel Engardio.
Thank you. I'm Joel Engardio. I represent the Sunset District. So I went to Paris with my husband a few years ago. We walked down the tree-lined streets and enjoyed the sidewalk cafes, and I barely noticed there were 6-story apartment buildings everywhere. And I didn't leave Paris thinking it's a terrible place because of all that housing density. I only remembered the wonderful ground floor bistros and not the building height. So I wonder, can we bring the spirit of Paris to San Francisco? Now, I don't propose turning our city into Paris. We'll always be uniquely San Francisco. But we don't have enough housing for our teachers, first responders, and the next generation of families. Why not? Because we haven't built enough housing to match decades of demand. And that results in something sad. What happens when people want to get married or have a kid? Too often, they move out of San Francisco. We have to say goodbye to our family and friends. And seniors don't get to see their adult children or grandchildren. So that's why we need to embrace the spirit of Paris. We need to build more 6-story apartments, 5 stories of housing above a cafe, grocery, senior center, childcare, everything that all residents in a neighborhood will benefit from. And we have the concept. It's called domicity, short for domiciles in the city. It's ideal for West Side neighborhoods. Domicity would fit on a transit corridor or any corner lot. Domicity returns areas of the West Side to its original intention. You see, beautiful 5- and 6-story apartment buildings from the Art Deco era were built on West Portal Avenue and Irving Street a century ago. Domicity goes back to the future to solve San Francisco's housing needs. It's going to help the adult children and grandchildren of longtime residents stay in San Francisco. It's going to give seniors more options. They can downsize to elevator buildings and age safely without having to leave their neighborhood. So it's in this spirit that I have co-sponsored legislation with the mayor to make it easier to build housing like Domicity, to remove the constraints around building the housing we desperately need for young families and seniors. Now, many of the people opposed to this legislation already have a home in San Francisco. Why are they opposing the ability of the next generation to have a home? Do they not remember what it was like to be young and seek the opportunity to build a life? This legislation is technical, but it also has heart. The technical part provides common sense reforms to outdated zoning regulations. The heart of this legislation keeps our loved ones in San Francisco by making it easier to house them. And if we build concepts like Domicity, we don't need comparisons to Paris. We will have created our best San Francisco. Thank you. And it's my honor to introduce my colleague, Supervisor Matt Dorsey.
Thank you so much, Joel. So I am going to, I'm told I have 4 minutes, and I'm setting a timer because I'm going on a rant. I'm the supervisor for District 6, which is home to the infamous 469 Stevenson Street that was a real example of political failure that valued a parking lot more than the desperately needed housing that we are on the hook to produce over the next 8 years. Right now, I work on this side of the building as a member of the Board of Supervisors. I've been at that role for a little over a year. But the reason I am going on a rant is because I spent 14 years on this side of the building in the city attorney's office working with colleagues like Scott Wiener and Rob Bonta, and I don't think it's an accident because we have a front row seat to all the political dysfunction of watching appellants and NIMBYs use well-intended laws to challenge the progress that we need to make on housing. The reason that we can't solve problems is because people are misusing well-intended laws, and that's why we're in the problems that we're in right now. That's why I am so appreciative to Mayor London Breed and my colleague Joel Engardio for the legislation that we're proposing today that is going to streamline processes, make needed changes to our zoning map, remove constraints, and finally fulfill the promise of what we're supposed to be doing in our housing element. For those of you who don't know, I'm just going to tell you, we throw around terms like housing element. There's a law in California that every 8 years municipalities have to update their general plan. And the portion of that applies to housing is called the housing element. The housing element we passed just recently is the most progressive public policy in my 20 plus years of working in city government in San Francisco. This is centered on racial and socioeconomic equity. It is about identifying the wrongs and, more importantly, righting the wrongs. This is the work that we have to be doing, not just to solve these problems, but to fulfill the promise of what the city and county of San Francisco, the city of St. Francis, should be. What we saw this week at the Board of Supervisors was an appellant who invited the Board of Supervisors to consider that there is a project where everybody who touched it, everybody in city government, all the career professionals from the city attorney's office, which was wrong on CEQA apparently, the fire marshal that was wrong on fire safety, our environmental planner wrong on how that works, our soils engineer from the Department of Public Health, career professionals, all of them were wrong it was like a perfect storm of error that the Board of Supervisors, with our expertise in these disciplines, was invited to fix. That it shouldn't be this way, and I'm really grateful to the mayor. I'm grateful to Hack, to YIMBY, to everybody for doing this. And with that, I'm coming in on time. Thank you so much, everybody.
Next up, Irving Gonzalez.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apology.
All right. Oh, good. Is it? No, it's now afternoon, and I'm so glad to see all you here. I am Irving Gonzalez. I'm an architect, native born here of San Francisco, working 35 years in the community of affordable housing and community-based design. I'm also the former chapter president of the American Institute of San Francisco here in San Francisco, and I am the current board chair of Mission Housing Development Corporation. So I mentioned all of that. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm proud. I'm proud. I mention all of that because I do have a unique perspective that allows me to see behind the curtain about how housing is delivered in this city, or I should say how it is not. It's not a pretty picture. So in that regards, let me share with you today why this legislation matters to me. So now I'm going to have to read this so that I get it all right. As an architect, a member of the San Francisco community, I'm frustrated with how long it takes and costs to build housing in the city. I am optimistic, however, because the current state legislation, as well as the proposed legislation that we're all about to support here, is a further incentivization to the process and policy to be able to deliver housing throughout the city by removing these obstacles. We have our clients' projects stalled indefinitely and they balloon in cost. So that doesn't help our housing situation or its affordability, especially for workforce housing of those that serve our communities, neighborhoods, and you. And in fact, I had a very good conversation. There he is with this gentleman back here who shared with me what it's like for many people that are unhoused. So it was great to talk to him. But it also provides perspective. Let's keep in mind that people matter as much as the buildings we design, and that's an integral part of the quality of life here in San Francisco. Improve their lives, improve our city. And let's keep, and housing must be a right and not a privilege of the few or a lengthy, arduous process. We all deserve to be housed, and housing should be readily achievable. And we can do it. It's within our power. So how do we achieve this? Great news. You're here. That's part of it. It's where there's a will, there's a way. First and foremost, let's remove the impact fees for 100% affordable housing that use a density bonus. Yeah. It makes no sense for the city to lend money to our nonprofit housing developers and then in turn come back around and say, okay, here are the fees you now have to pay, okay? All of that, hundreds of thousands of dollars could be more units for more people. Woo. Remember the days when we used to, have to provide all this parking? Well, we're a transit-based city. We're only 45 square miles. So that allows us to remove the parking, which allows us to provide more housing. So this is that next step. Secondly, and there are more ways that others can speak to and have, is removing the burden of conditional use requirements and securing entitlements to a new housing development and place new housing throughout the city. It was great to hear about Eugene Liu and domesticity from our supervisor. Great concept. This means fewer and unnecessary hearings for our housing, reducing the amount of time it takes to get new housing approved. And as we know, time is money. Let's spend it wisely and with the intention of getting folks homes and keeping them there. Each and every one of us can make a difference for the greater good. So with that, because I know there are other speakers here, let me introduce Amy Fryman from Spur.
I'm going to move the microphone up for the very tall lady. All right, so I'm the last speaker today, and my order was to get everyone really hyped up to go in for public comment today and get this damn thing passed. I want to give a couple comments really quickly on how I got into this work because it is so closely tied to exactly what we're tackling today. I moved to San Francisco when I was 22 years old, making $15 an hour as a contract draftsperson for a tiny architecture firm. And I came in super naive and I heard, hey, San Francisco is a renter city. This is a welcoming city. This is a sustainable city. And I quickly learned that we can say that out of one side of our mouth, but our actual laws and our actual processes and the actual way that things work mean that some random nearby homeowner can say, no, 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 not like that. You can't do that, and they can veto it. And we as the city have not just allowed that, we have created that. We are responsible for that. We have empowered people because we have created those tools. And we have the power to undo them. And so for the last 7, 8, 9 years, the YIMBY movement has been springing up, and we have been building political will, and we have been trying to help champion the work from leaders like Mayor Breed and leaders like Senator Scott Wiener, who was behind all the state laws that made this required and high profile and prominent and possible today. And supporting leaders like Joel Engardio and Matt Dorsey's leadership on housing, representing opposite neighborhoods across the city. Representing parts of the Tenderloin and Soma and Treasure Island all the way out to the outer Sunset. And saying that what we can unify behind is that we need more housing supply and we are doing this wrong. And finally accepting that for decades, San Francisco has uncritically suffered the consequences of our own hypocrisy when it comes to housing. And we have let ourselves get away with saying we have certain values and not actually following through on them and otherwise doing the opposite. And it is long time past when we need to spend our resources on stopping undermining our own work. We do all the planning and then we say, no, not like that. We pass a bunch of the policies and then we say they don't have to be enforced. We say we want something and then we let random groups that do not represent the values of San Francisco undo that work. And now we have a requirement from the state that we need to get our shit together and we need to undo these policies. And if we don't pass this out at Planning Commission and Land Use Committee at the Board of Supervisors and the full Board of Supervisors, and then pass the dozen ordinances that are going to come after it for rezoning and all these other policies and processes that are in the housing element, San Francisco, as a city, risk losing hundreds of millions of dollars in affordable housing money, in public transportation money. We risk losing our local control over permitting and zoning in many cases because we have proven that if we can't fix this stuff, that we are not competent enough and should not be responsible for doing that. We put ourselves at legal liability of the state attorney general suing the city of San Francisco and making City Attorney David Chu defend the way that we've been doing things and the fact that we don't need to be following state laws for our hand in the housing crisis. And so I just want to thank everyone here today. Thank you, Mayor Breed and your administration, for the courage and clarity to not just do this at the minimum level, but do this right and set leadership all throughout the state of California about what the most aggressive and clear-headed housing element can be. And thank you for the members of the Board of Supervisors today that are hitching their wagon to that because they want to be on the right side of this. And I hope the rest of the Board of Supervisors can hear today that we are watching how you handle these following months and the coming years when it comes to housing element legislation, because the consequences are in your hands if these ordinances do not pass with the clarity and rigor that they were originally introduced. And so with that, I just want to close out today. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for all the people that took off work today. All of this work started by people playing hooky on their lunch break and coming for public comment to expose the hypocrisy of how San Francisco has gotten away with not matching our policies to our values for so long. And we're going to tie up that bookend and hopefully have this be one of the last hearings where we have to do that, because this legislation is what's going to make it so that the default is that good housing projects get approved. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Let's head upstairs to the Planning Commission. Thank you, everybody.
Let's go.